This week's episode is sponsored by the psychological horror nightmare, Return to Silent Hill. When a mysterious letter draws James back to Silent Hill, he finds a town consumed by a terrifying fog. As he searches for the woman he once loved, the streets begin to warp around him, filled with monstrous creatures, impossible visions, and a horrifying revelation that he may not survive. Based on the legendary Silent Hill 2 and directed by Christoph Gans, Return to Silent Hill blends haunting psychological horror with surreal, nightmarish imagery that fans of the franchise know all too well. Some truths should stay buried in the fog. Watch now on Screambox.
Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bowl.
And we hope that you haven't missed us too much after some scheduling issues and, internet issues we missed last week, unfortunately. But we're back with an all-new episode that is going to have a grab bag full of games that we've been playing recently, demos, full-fledged releases, and, some almost like Horrorbyte-esque experiences at that. But before we dive into the mix this week, Neil, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, we're at the beginning of a heat wave, so that's fun. But got the internet sorted out, so that's the main thing.
There you go. I was messaging you before. I'm just like giving a shout, like, "Hey, I hope your new router is working nicely for you this week." And then you're like, a heat wave, and I was like, "Oh shit, we're having a rainstorm here in New England." So I was like, "Oh God, it's just going to be the perfect storm of calamities this week." But so far, doing okay.
Yeah, so far we got the Horrorbytes done, so we can get this done.
Which is a great segue into giving people a reminder that while we missed the last 2 weeks with Horrorbytes, we've recorded successfully our finale for the theme of space that we'd been covering, where Neil and I have both brought a space horror game for the week. And, in the meantime, leading up to that new episode that's going to release this Thursday, you can, of course, go back into our episode feed and check out part one of the theme of space, where we both brought two distinctively space horror games that tackle different subgenres, but at the same time, they utilize those subgenres to uniquely be a part of that sort of subgenre. So in getting into our respective grab bag this week, Neil, why don't we start with something that we both had played before we're getting into kind of like our solo horror gaming endeavors?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a couple we'll bookend with that we've both played. But this one is a demo for Sprawl Zero, which is from Neath, I think, published by Quayle. I mean, the simple picture is it's like a old school 2000s first person shooter, taking like all sorts of different aspects from ones, lots of console ones and lots of ones like PC ones you remember. So it's got a bit of Half-Life, it's got a bit of Singularity, I think, to it. Bulletstorm, even like going further forward in terms of like, I mean, you have effectively a gravity gun in it, yeah, which is always handy. But I mean, down to like the aesthetic, the sound of it, everything just feels like turn of the century, like first person shooter, like just the chunky sort of character models and gun models and the environments and stuff. Like the fact that the soundtrack is just like sounds like the most we've watched the Matrix thing ever, and lots of robotic voices and blokes in cybernetic suits, and it just feels like a throwback in a fun way, like it's just doing all this. I mean, it kind of looks like Quake 2 a bit, I think, in terms of like chunkiness of it all, but in a more sort of human setting, I guess. But I mean, the guns are fun, which is always a good thing. But it's gory, which obviously is why we're covering it mainly. The enemies you can fight like that, it's great. But like the combat goes that you have your guns as normal, but when they run out of ammo, you can just literally just chuck them at the enemies, and like pick up their ones and things like that, and you have this sort of gravity leash thing that allows you to sort of push and pull things and like break holes in stuff, throw like petrol cans and all sorts of enemies and rubble and whatever. Yeah, and then you get stuff like a slow-mo ability, Max Payne-esque style, to really sort of further cement that sort of a turn of the century sort of vibe. And yeah, it's kind of just sort of putting all those ideas of games around that era in a little soup, effectively. And by God, it's like a really, really entertaining demo. I mean, it's not, a PS1-esque style sort of throwback like many have been. It definitely looks more like, PC and maybe PS2 era sort of stuff, like in terms of that, but like probably more enhanced than a PS2 could manage. I mean, we both sort of noted that the leash sort of has a half-life appeal. It's like the gravity gun, like also like I said, Bulletstorm in terms of the leash and that. I mean, there's not much to it. I mean, there's a story there, but it really is about how fun it is to play. I think, which is just like I said, the fact you got slow mo, the fact you can stop bullets in midair, the fact you can chuck all these things at enemies, you can just smash through them with like a power fist thing, and you can chuck grenades back at them. It just every 5 seconds reminds you of something you played in the early 2000s. Like yes, and not in a way where it feels like a novelty. Like it genuinely feels great to play. Like, and it's just a demo, and my God, I mean, the rest of the game even comes close. I mean, there's some progression, in terms of what abilities are there, in the demo. You do get stuff that, added to you as you go on. But yeah, if they can continue on that with the rest of the game, but yeah, it was quite a novelty as well. I just think going back to the idea of playing like a slice of a game like this, because that genuinely was how many of those games came to me, where I play a demo and like, oh wow, this is amazing, I'm gonna play the full thing of this. But yeah, it's fantastic. Like, can a demo be one of your games of the year at the minute? I'm just hoping the rest of the game's out this year, and then it's great because I mean, strong opening, like definitely limited in some ways, but I mean, some of the stuff they've shown in the trailer as well, like it's just going for like everything that just ticks boxes in this genre.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was elated to see that as soon as you finish the first level, there's a follow-up level, because I was just like, I need more of this. And like you said, it's a pretty easy game to sell based on that pitch, right? It's like, yeah, you've basically got the gravity gun from Half-Life, and that lets you like whip things around the environment. But I think it's even more than that, because of the fact that you see all of these influences that it has in its gameplay. And, you could ramble on that list, but it's not just that you can identify mechanics that you've enjoyed in other games, but as I was saying to you after I played it, it's more about, I think, how Sprawl Zero is able to kind of like have all these mechanics like coalesce into something that feels as fluid and as gratifying as you would want it to be, rather than just like, oh, this part is removed because, oh, this feels like a gravity gun portion. This feels like a Titanfall kind of a portion. But really, you're taking all these mechanics and they're so interchangeable on a second by second basis that you forget almost instantly when you start playing it, like these influences, because it's just so confident, I think, in how it gives you these like arena playgrounds essentially for each section of the level. And then you can kind of just like go through it. You could play as a straight shooter, but naturally it's a lot more rewarding to kind of like utilize those different abilities and whatnot. And I think that for me, even like a little aspect like weapons have different levels to them and different grades to them. And like, that could be a feature that would be distracting. Like I was giving Back 4 Blood shit about that when I was talking to somebody like, oh, well, this is a game that introduces like different color shading in terms of like rarity of guns, like almost the Doom effect or the Diablo effect, right? I need my epic loot or my legendary loot. And rather than this game having that kind of an aspect and it getting too caught up in it that it slows down the pace, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, you are this like living weapon with a variety of abilities and you don't have to like overly rely on the super powered guns. You could just like kind of utilize the environment at times and whatnot. And I just found that like I played through this demo twice and it was just so satisfying. And I very notably have like a soft spot for games from this era that is the influence, you know, like golden age of early aughts FPSs and like it looking like kind of this like Eurojank game, if you will. From that, like, I don't know, there's just something about that aesthetic that is so played out, but here it just works because they're presenting it as something from a bygone era. However, it doesn't play like that. And it has the refinement of, you know, from the early age of the 2000s to, you know, 2026. It feels indicative of growth despite it having that old school kind of look to it.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And yeah, I second your point on coming back to it as a demo, which again is like a sort of feeling that definitely is reminiscent of that time because it has things about it that you're like, I'd like to try that now. I know this, you know, and now I understand the game better and just sort of try and go for it because it does have that sort of level of like obviously when you first start it, you're not really getting a great rhythm, like just trying things out. It's a bit messy and chaotic what you do, but it works because of what you can do and flinging stuff around is entertaining. But yeah, as you learn it and keep going through it, like you can start chaining things together like quite confidently, like doing these like grabber things, chuck it at someone, pick their gun up, like blast the next guy, go into slow-mo bullet time and like throw their bullets back at them and stuff like it. Just then you can do that in like one smooth motion without really trying to, like, which is the best thing. The instinct starts kicking in once you really get into the idea of what it's doing, and just like that's such a rare thing, like to really not have a game feel stagey in that sense, where it really does just feel like it flows nicely. And I think while there's a blandness to the levels so far, like, which is fine, I think it's fine for what they're trying to do because it lets the color stand out where they need to in terms of their color coding, and generally gives you a pretty good idea of what you have to do, where you can go. And once you understand that, it just makes that sort of mastery like come into it and like really trying to show off in that game, and because it looks cool. It's the sort of game where you can go, look at this sort of thing, and then look at. I mean, honestly, look at the Steam-based trailers and stuff, and like how they sort of piece together things in the trailers, and it can be that good. Like it's just something else.
Yeah, the fact that you could play another first-person shooter that has bullet time and it still is like it feels as satisfying as the first time that you ever experienced bullet time, if not more so, because again, like of all the possibilities of combos and ways you can interact with the environment and string together those things for like ultimate destructibility. And, there's something I think that is very primal and maybe like simplistic here at times, but like that works in its favor. I think like the only hiccup that you ever come in terms of like your stopping your progression is either like a power switch, a power bank that you have to find, or a railroad kind of like train car doors in your way, and you literally just have to use the gravity ability to either rip the door off the hinges or just basically smash the power box. Like there's something very immediate, there's something very blunt about it, but at the same time, like that's so fitting with this game that allows you to kind of just like move through it as quickly as you would want to. You could, be slow and cautious, but it's one of those games that once you find that rhythm, it really does play like, what you would want the best game from this era to play as, but none of them really do. So it kind of just makes me even more excited for this, which I guess is also like a follow-up because this developer had done a game called just Sprawl a few years ago, which I didn't even know about. So maybe that'll tide me over in the build up to this one.
Maybe, yeah. But I mean, surely it can't be this good. Like,
yeah, that's the other side of it.
Well, to be fair, I've seen it's got decent reviews, and it was only like 3 years ago. So, but yeah, it's like I mean, yeah, that's definitely one to try out though. I think just because this has been so fun, and it's nice to not feel gimmicky. It would be so easy for it to feel like a gimmick and not really go anywhere with it. But yeah, I think that anything you could kind of criticize it for in terms of like level design blandness, maybe like in terms of like visually speaking, like I think he's made up for the fact that with these sort of multi-tiered sort of ways to go around it, like the experimentation is there, that you can just sort of try different things and really sort of there's bits in like Trepang where like you kind of really feel that sort of old school shooter vibe of like chaining together cool abilities and like really just having fun with a shooter in a way that isn't just like trying to exploit it, or because so many of them are very online focused now as well. Yeah, it was just great, like to play a first person shooter that was designed for one person, and to just really just try all that the fun things out about it and really have a blast.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, like you said, this gets a release date for this year, but we'll definitely be revisiting this one, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and in the meantime, definitely probably have to go and have a go at the first one. I think the very Quakeness of it, which on the day of recording, happy 30th anniversary to Quake, probably helps. Like it just instantly felt like comfort. Like apart from the fact my hands aren't in any good shape by comparison these days, but to do the old school Quake stuff. But anything that kind of gives me that approximation is always going to be high on my interests.
Yeah, but I can share what I had been playing the last 2 weeks. A game that I feel like I didn't think I would be playing it as long as I have been, just because of the fact that like I've seen some people say like, oh, this is like a game you can finish in, I mean, the game itself says it on the Steam page, like you could finish this in 20 to 40 minutes, but there's something about the like tactileness of its mechanics, which is so very simple, but at the same time, you have this ever looming threat that is really driving you to kind of like complete it as quickly as possible. And that is from developer Leafy Games, Idols of Ash, which is a game that is all about descending into this pit and basically trying to make your way down as quickly as possible. And you have essentially a grappling hook, and that is your only tool. You can throw the grappling hook and then latch on to parts of the environment, and you can slide down it. You can utilize that to kind of swing yourself from these very almost like, I don't know, these like fantastical stone structures and obelisks that continue down into the pit until you reach the bottom floor of it and whatnot. And that all sounds like well enough. You're like, cool, you get to traverse this environment. And, if you fall, you can take damage. You have a limited amount of health naturally. And other than these kind of urns that you'll come across periodically that let you save your progression down into the pit, there's not a lot else to do in this game. However, the real hook of this game, and it's one that I'll try to talk about as vaguely as possible because it is best experienced for oneself, is there is something that is pursuing you down into the pit. So it's not so much like, oh, let me try to find this extra little ledge to latch onto, or let me try to discern what would be the quickest route down. It's more like, yeah, do those things, but also if you don't do it quickly and in a manner where you're not kind of like around, that will be a very short descent because something will make sure that that current run that you're on will be, abrupt, if you will. Yeah. And, again, being vague about it, that realization, because I went into this knowing nothing other than, I originally thought, oh, this would be a cool horror bite because it's a game that's supposed to be less than an hour to complete. It's got, a lot of it's overwhelmingly positive on Steam and whatnot. I was like, yeah, let me just check this out, but didn't look into it other than the grapple mechanic. And I have to say that this game had probably the scariest realization of what it actually was you were trying to flee from, because it's very gradual. You start to hear things and then, they start to get louder if you've been kind of milling about. And then you look up and you realize what is pursuing you. And that was the most oh shit moment I've had this year with a game, that I very seldomly have with games, not because I'm some big brave guy or whatever, but like, I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like the majority of the time when we get around to a game, we're more or less going into it with an understanding of what this entails. And for me, I didn't do any of that background research. And I think that my overall experience with this game was so much stronger for it because of the fact that, I not only didn't realize that horror aspect of it, but at the same time, like the mechanics are so simple, but so well refined. And it is one of those games that I think really does speak to that notion of something that we always talk about with horror games or, even horror films where things are a lot scarier when you can hear them before you see them. And there's no better example this year for me than I think Idols of Ash.
Yeah, I will also point out that the Steam page does give away a bit too much too. So I got that front.
Yeah.
So do avoid that if you want to go in as blind as possible. Just, click that download button and go from there. But yeah, no, I like games about climbing in horror. Like, I mean, what was it? White Knuckle, I think, came out last year.
White Knuckle, yeah.
Yeah, which I think was like the opposite, where you're climbing up a lot of the time. But yeah, it makes sense because I play games that are about climbing that aren't really horror based, and it's more about the difficulty of the climb, and the puzzle is finding the right climb. But adding that sort of horror side to it, where you have like you pushed into a panic effectively to do it properly, makes perfect sense. So yeah, it's like it sounds like as well 40 minutes odd is a pretty decent sort of time frame for this, is it not?
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. Yeah. I think I probably spent about 2 hours with it just because even once I had finished, you get this extra mode that's even more difficult, but at the same time, you could play it without the persistent threat. And I think that in and of itself is just a testament to the mechanics here. Again, like all you have is a grappling hook, but the ways in which you can utilize that, it's going to sound simplistic when I say it, but it's like you can latch onto ledges. You could just rappel down it to the next ledge that you find, or you can use it to basically swing to other ledges. But there's a multitude of paths to basically the core of this pit that you're descending down. There's not just one sort of route that you're looking for. And that really makes it feel like a parkour game in the context of this dark fantasy horror setting and whatnot. And so I think, it's only $3. And I think that, it's probably for a game that is less than $5, this is the best less than $5 game that I've purchased this year so far. Because of that, not only that primal feeling of fear that I got from playing this and having that discovery, but just like mechanically speaking, like you keep it simple and yet it's one that has a lot of replayability to it. So I think I'm assuming you didn't get around to playing this one yet. Did you?
No. But given the time frame of it, I will no doubt at some point.
Yeah, I figured this would be a great Steam Deck game if it's compatible with it in that way. So I think maybe we'll get around to the end of the year. If you've gotten a chance to check it out, we can speak more to the specifics of it. But just that moment of a realization just absolutely shattered me. But it sounds like you need to avoid that Steam page because otherwise it could spoil that for you. But even still, I think it's mechanically and atmospherically strong enough that people could get a lot out of this one, despite having that menace revealed ahead of time.
Yeah, that's fine. Should we take a break, I guess? And
yeah, we can take a quick break and we'll get into what else we've been playing recently. But more on those games in a moment. And we're back from our break. And Neil, what else had you been playing recently?
So the demo came out for a game that I wishlisted anyway because it looked interesting, which is Penguin Colony. I think I even mentioned it a while back as well. But
you did.
Which comes from the developers of, if I can pronounce this right, Umurangi Generation, and is published by Fellow Traveller, who of course have great reputation on the show for stuff like Citizen Sleeper and Paradise Killer. and stuff like that. So the concept of it is it's like a retelling of or reimagining of like Lovecraft stories such as At the Mountains of Madness, where like you're in the Antarctic, there's different factions coming after this ancient thing, and like each of them racing to get to it. But you're not experiencing the story through their eyes. No, you are penguins, plural, because you can switch between them. And you basically find out about the story as it's going along as a penguin, each time. And in these vast wastes, and it's a really fascinatingly strange little game in that regard, in this demo alone, where you have I mean, we've just said it earlier, about Sprawl Zero and how it like reminds you of like a certain era of first-person shooters. This reminds me very much of like Team Ico sort of games in terms of like, there's the little stamina meter for the penguins that if you go too steep an incline or sort of jump too much, it will wear out and you'll basically flop back down. But being a penguin, you can like literally just like slide on your belly or along places. I mean, the story is being narrated in the background the whole time, and like it's if you know those stories, you'll know the sort of connotations of what's going to happen. But viewing it through the eyes of like penguins is interesting because they're observers effectively in this story that don't really have the same level of effect on the story, but you're pretty much given straight away like the red beacon in the distance and aiming to go towards it, but it's not obviously a very straightforward path. Lots of like ice, lots of places to sort of you think you're going the right way, and then like you can't get through here or through there. I mean, you could swim, yes, and do stuff like that. But yeah, it's just basically like figuring out the best way to sort of get there, and like getting little tidbits of like the story through like things you find and like parts of stuff in the environment. It is very much in love with the thing, down to the fact that title cards are the thing's title cards, and the music is occasionally the thing's music, and it seems like again very very much a deliberate choice, but it is deliberately weird and obviously predates the thing in terms of like history because it's set in the 1930s, and so yeah, surprise surprise, the Nazis are involved in this one. But yeah, it has that sort of cosmic horror thing, and while you don't get too much of it in this demo, it's like it's already setting up like this very curious sort of notion. The fact that you are playing a penguin, it feels a bit absurd that you're just dicking around, like sliding on your belly and like waddling about, and you can be different penguins to get to different places. So like you just swap from one to the other, like when you meet a little crowd of penguins and do that. And yeah, it's just sort of figuring out how you go around. It's very simplistic, but it's weird in a really interesting way. And like, I mean, it's why I liked the sound of it to begin with. Like, it just made sense to me that it would be something a bit out there and a very different way of telling that story. In those stories, where we get the very obvious ones, are very human elements to them, and yeah, it's. I'm very curious to see how the rest of the game goes, but like already it's like this is mad, like in the best way. Like it's just endearingly odd, and like I said, it does just feel like the sort of thing that would show up on PS2 and be like my favorite game ever, sort of thing. Much like say Shadow of the Colossus did, being one of my favorites.
Yeah, I absolutely love the look of this game, and the bizarre nature of its sort of look, its premise, and then its influences is not lost on me as being like a main sort of draw and appeal. But at the same time, to your point, like it seems very much like the type of thing that is perfectly utilizing the look and the feel of early aughts like PS2 games. But again, like having this bizarre, weird confidence for something that admittedly is very bizarre and weird, but to hear that it's able to kind of like capitalize on that in a way that's more than just novelty, right? I think that that's a huge factor with games like this, is that, that is not misplaced because of, whether it's based upon the sort of first look at it, or now your experience with the demo, it seems like these are developers that set out to do something very specific and were very clear about their influences and the utilization of those, but at the same time that they're able to make something that feels, I don't know, at times like unprecedented, because of the fact of those influences, and also just like that very specific graphical style. But even looking on the Steam page at the cover art, if you will, for the game, you just get the sense like, oh, this is someone that understands how to utilize a specific era or a specific genre or subgenre's graphical style. And that is like a great primer for this experience that, based upon what you said, just sounds like, yeah, fuck it. I want to play a game that's cosmic horror through the eyes of a penguin that feels like it's a reimagining of Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. Like, who wouldn't that appeal to? That's a huge horror fan. So that just makes me even more excited than I already was to check this out. And the fact I haven't played the demo yet speaks for itself. I think I need to rectify that immediately.
But yeah, I mean, we've been talking before the show about like the Apple TV series Widow's Bay, and like the sort of balance between comedy and horror, and how it doesn't always have to be like out there, like really slapstick comedy or whatever. Like that, you can just get horror out and comedy out of the absurdity of the situation. Honest to God, there's things in this that are disturbing in their own right, but it's kind of absurd because you are waddling along as a happy little penguin. And it's like, and it works. Like it's really strange how it works. You do just get to view it from a very different sort of perspective, and I didn't expect. But yeah, like it's fascinating. And like, honest to God, I want to see the rest of it so much, so quickly, and it is due to come out this year fully. So that's good. But yeah, there is something quite hilarious about like waddling around and going on fun little like slides, and yeah, then you'll come across like some terrible, horrible thing.
That's got to be a great contrast that they lean into throughout that, because it's like, yeah, like you said, you're playing this cutesy penguin that's just sliding on his stomach, and then all of a sudden you come across this like Nazi base that has these just like horrific occult happenings and whatnot. Like that'll be, I think that'll provide a lot of laughs, as well as hopefully some moments of genuine dread in terms of like how this is able to kind of change tonally on a dime, if you will. And we'll have to see, how successful that is for the runtime of this game. But at the same time, it's one I think we're both very much looking forward to seeing for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I suppose that leaves us with our last game to cover this week. And we've decided to bookend the show with something that we both have played, much like we both had played Sprawl Zero. We have both played a recent horror release that I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been waiting for this game for a while. And that's not so much a commentary on the time it took to actually develop it, but more importantly, like this is a game that I feel like was pretty compelling just from the look of it, and very ambitious at that from its outset when it was getting teased on, Twitter and Blue Sky and whatnot. And now that we've finally gotten our hands on the third shift from developer Teboa Games, this is one that I think, for me is easily a highlight of the year. But for those that are unaware of this game, this is very much a homage to the Game Boy style of, sort of era, I suppose, right? Quite literally, the presentation is that of a classic Game Boy screen, and utilizes, for the most part, this like three-toned color palette of green, light green, and then black. And so like, in terms of like the very limited technological aspects of the era it's invoking, I would say that this is like, just from an aesthetic standpoint, one of the strongest things I've played this year, because of its ability to, again, like facilitate this type of experience that we so frequently, even within this episode, are frequently praising, and that being a game that is presented in whether it's a graphical style, whether it's a gameplay parameters of a bygone era. However, the contents there within are indicative of, the modern sort of not only ratings, but in terms of like the type of game that you would have wanted to play on your classic Game Boy from back in the day, given just the survival horror roots of the third shift and whatnot. And so, for some context, this is a game where you basically play a security guard of the Roanoke Museum of History and Wonder, and you're basically navigating the halls for the night shift. And very quickly, things begin to go awry. Now, they have various sort of exhibits going on. There's one with, animals, sea life, but then there's also this very sort of grisly and controversial human body exhibit that you very quickly will uncover the sort of the horrifying aspects of that and the history of the museum and how these are all interlaced into one. And so, I think for me, as I had already said, this is a game that visually speaking, I was already sold on. Now, this is not to like cast doubt on, whether it's the developer or anybody involved in this, but like, how many times have you and I been sold on a game, visually speaking, before we got to put our hands actually on it? And then it does not necessarily deliver from a gameplay standpoint. But that being said, for me, I was floored by the third shift's ability to not only take that, homage heavy graphical presentation, but also having a structure that is very tried and true with survival horror of giving you, free reign of the museum, getting to explore it, the sort of traditional pacing of a survival horror game. But I think more importantly, like interweaving a narrative there within, as well as the presentation, in not just from that graphical style or the aesthetic of the early 90s to late 90s, but more importantly, I think like camera angles, like the literal presentation of environments and the manipulation of them and the presentation of just the museum as a whole and the horrors there within is just so strong, visually speaking and cinematically speaking, in terms of sort of the presentation of both environments, but as I already said, the horrors there within. But I was just completely riveted by this game. I'm curious, what was your first like opening hour with this game like? And did it sort of like find that blending of presentation, but also gameplay for you, like it did for me?
Yeah, I was initially worried that going for the Game Boy formula that it may be limited, in terms of what it
Mm,
was doing, which it
yeah,
isn't. It's using the aesthetic, but it is,
right.
as you said, very much going with something a bit more modern. And yeah, realizing the freedom you're going to have,
Mm,
all of us, I was like, wow. And then my worry then was like, oh, maybe this is too big.
right.
Maybe it's too big. But that's that initial sort of survival horror feeling of being in a new environment where you just like, oh, how am I going to remember where everything is and like remember how to access this and do that and whatever and like you learn. And, the early game is good enough at teaching you whilst also slowly sort of ramping up the idea that something's off and little things, the first time you sort of get the sort of camera feed problems because the smart thing about this game is pretty much your view of yourself is through the security cameras at all times
Mhm.
almost, and which is great like as an aesthetic. But it like when you start realizing that, oh shit, this is going to be like a classic survival horror, but in a way that is very much in keeping with like the Game Boy Color sort of simplicity in terms of what you can do. It's a really fascinating mix. I was really into that, but when you start getting those little creepy hints of what's going to happen, I mean that human body exhibit is like a great
Mm,
example of just like stuff there looks creepy already, like before you even get into stuff to what actually comes out of it. But yeah, the further you go and the things that actually do sort of come out of this game and the monster design and oof, I mean the monster design is like great. Like I think last year Look Outside, which was a great example of like that as well with monster design.
mm,
This again, especially given limitations of the
yeah.
visual, like wow, like there's some animations for them as well where they're just like where it's the way they emerge from things and
Mm,
stuff like that, or just appear in screen. It really does make great use of that limited camera, like where you just suddenly something's in frame and like oh god, and because your character is like really like simply animated, like again that thing we were just talking about, the absurdity of things against the actual terror, like it's really slightly funny, like when you're kind of sort of running away from things and they're like coming at you through the screen, along the screen. You're like, oh geez. I mean, it's worse when they catch you, and you get those little
Yeah.
death animations and stuff, and they're like quite graphic for what they are. And yeah, like it's intoxicating. It really is once you get to, and the puzzles are really great to sort of get into. They feel very in keeping with classic survival horror, like, and because it's a lot of cursor based stuff as well. Like I don't know, it doesn't feel like just like any survival horror post like 1995, 96.
Mm.
It does feel like the clocked, not the clock tower, but the Alone in the Dark sort of era. Clock Tower too, to be fair.
Mm.
But that sort of thing where point and click games were like the standard in a lot of cases. But I think also the fact that each sort of wing of the museum has its own things, and
Yes.
once you establish the idea of what you're going to have monsters and stuff like that, it's knowing that you're going into certain places and thinking, I have an idea of what it's going to show me, what it's going to show me, and it still manages to sort of surprise you. Like, I mean, when you go to the Terrors of the Deep, for instance, which I was dreading once that started, and that, Christ, that's got some stuff in it that was like terrifying, like, and which seems strange to say given like how simple it is, but I do think with that design that is there for the monsters, and like I said, the animations and the way they just appear, there's real respect given to each like beast and creature that like can appear. And yeah, I mean, don't want to spoil too much with it obviously, but it was just so the fact that a lot of it just kind of trades in on like cryptids and things like that, and ideas of like these themes for each of the sections, and the way they're quite inventive. I think strange. Yeah, there are bits where they go more traditional in terms of the monsters. Yeah, where it's like, oh, well, it's this historical monster or this one or this one, that. But it's the stuff that's more original, that's kind of got a weirdness and like a surprise factor to it. Like, it's still good when you do get like the more established monsters, if you will. But yeah, it's just constantly surprising, and such variety, and yeah, like it's that soundtrack as well. I have to give it that chip tune stuff again, and just I think as they describe it, like crunchy audio. It does just really have that really. I love that sort of Game Boy crunch of a soundtrack, and it's just so in keeping. It just makes it feel very eerie, all the time, like, and in a way that you can't really do with like anything more sophisticated. So yeah, love it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to put it. Like, I think it's very reaffirming that the first thing that you said about it was like, you have these certain expectations. Is it going to be too limited, perhaps, because of, again, when you create a game in any world that is going to be a part of that is abiding by, the potential limitations of the era in which it is heavily, invoking and utilizing. You worry like, oh, is this going to be too restrictive? And then I had that same exact experience that you had, where all of a sudden my reality was shifted, and I was like, oh, is this going to be too big now? Right. The fact that you have this almost free reign of running through the museum, free reign, not exactly, but you get to explore it at your leisure until you start coming across the natural sort of progression blockers of, oh, I need this tool to get through this door, or I need this ID card and whatnot. But like, it really does open up your eyes early on to like, oh, okay, this is going to actually sort of circumvent a lot of the issues that I have with certain games that, again, like harken back to an older era of development, because of the fact that, it is sort of challenging those limitations. And it's doing that not only in the scope of the game, but more importantly, I think, and to, again, your credit, like the sort of like horrors found there within. And I think that that's probably the strongest aspect of any game that sets out to utilize this more antiquated sort of aesthetic is that it really does make players unprepared for the horrors that they're going to face, right? I think that I get into this mindset when I'm playing a game that looks like this from the outset, and I'm like, well, it's got this older graphical style, limited color palette, what have you. So I have this sort of like notion initially, like, oh, well, there's only so much they can show you, or there's only a certain level of a scare factor, if you will. Not that that's normally how I go into games, but like, yeah, you're using a limited color palette, this older style. And then to your point again, like, yeah, this game has some fantastic monster design. And more importantly, the utilization, I think, of that CCTV perspective allows it to portray those scares in a manner that is unexpected at times. But if anything, it's able to bolster the horror aspects of these scenes of, a monster is running at you, or you have to avoid a monster that's pursuing you. And so I think for me, like, it's not just the art style, but also like the presentation of those horrors. And like you said, with those various exhibits, each one of them being distinguished in their own sort of like theme, if you will, really allows the player to slowly begin to understand the types of horrors they'll encounter. And if anything, that builds a level of anxiety for me in terms of like, oh, now I'm going to Terrors of the Deep. What kind of hell am I going to be facing now based upon my previous experience with the other exhibits and the other horror aspects? I also thought like the writing was really strong in terms of like not only the protagonist and their experience, them being a vessel for the player to like get to know this museum, but also like interactions with the lead security guard and uncovering the overall history of the museum and whatnot, which the game does not shy away from at all. It leads with that, in fact, in those opening moments. And, I think for me, as you rightly said, like its chunky soundtrack further was just like one of those little tidbits that, you could easily overlook early on, but it really does become a defining feature of this game. And furthermore, it speaks to, TBOA Games really sort of walking that talk, if you will. It's like, yeah, it's easy to catch somebody's eye with this Game Boy graphic style when you look at it amongst some other things on Steam. However, like that same attention to care and detail is seemingly throughout the entirety of the game and has spared no expense in providing you an experience that feels authentic to that era and that technology. But at the same time, you would never find something like this on the Game Boy. So I think that's probably the best compliment that I could give this game, is that it's not only a satisfying horror game, but it utilizes that influence and that homage aspect in the best way possible, because it feels authentic in a way that so few homages actually are, I think.
Yeah, no, totally agree on that.
Yeah. And I think it's just one of those things that, I mean, as of the time of recording, I mean, it's pitifully only has 45 reviews. Granted, it has a positive rating, but like for a game like this that has achieved as much as it has, like it deserves many more reviews than it does. So if anybody is listening, they should, and has played it or, is interested in checking it out, like give this a go and definitely try to show it some love in the reviews if you enjoy it as much as we did. And naturally, I'm sure this will be a game that you and I are going to return to when we get closer to the end of the year and discussing games that left an impact on us and whatnot. But yeah, major shout out to TBOA Games with this one, because this not only lived up to the hype for me, but I think if anything, managed to surpass it in some pretty pivotal ways in terms of like someone that, I don't know, I feel like I'm inundated with survival horror games and get very ticked off sometimes by like games that, I don't know, I get the feeling that, oh, we picked this art style because it would pop off the Steam page or the itch.io page and kind of separate itself, and then you play it and you're like, it looks different, but it plays like everything else. And the third shift, I think, for me, certainly was the full package in that regard. So I'm glad that we both, I actually didn't know that you had gotten some time to play this one. So I was happy to see in our notes for this episode that you were going to chat about it as well, because this is definitely a highlight of the year for me so far.
Yeah, I think it's because I remember you talking about it before, and then obviously with the delays we've had
Mm.
in conversation as well, I had time to play it more and more. So it's like, yeah, it was one of the positives of internet troubles. Is I did get more time to end up playing this.
It's one of those good problems as they were. But
Exactly.
yeah, like I said, probably not the last time we're chatting about this one, but it will be the final game we're covering this week as we're going to wrap things up now. But yeah, as I said in the beginning of the episode, very glad to be back. And for everyone listening, be sure to tune back in this Thursday for our finale on our space theme of Horror Bites, in which Neil and I both bring another space horror game to the table, utilizing various subgenres to tackle their varied genre in a unique and horrifying fashion. But until next week, my friend, as always, it is a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Okay, man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at Safe Room Pod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.